All right, thank you. Wait for this to queue up, but in the meantime, yeah, Ron Stelmarski. I'm from our Dallas studio, Dallas, Texas. So I've come a long way. I've enjoyed the time here and glad to hear of everyone's story as we commiserate in the unbuilt. But for us, I'm going to dive into the project first and talk a little more about the studio as we go. But we called this hydrotherapy, and you'll find out a bit more why as we go. It's really in 3 chapters. It really deals with anticipation, activation, and speculation. And each of these I would call it a series of unbuilts that are informing more unbuilt projects that are really building towards a larger idea, all with the hope that there will be some conclusion at some point. And our site here, you can see the skyline of Dallas. In the foreground is Fair Park, and that's been the name of the park since the 1800s. And we'll talk more about why there's a question mark about whether or not it's fair. I'm going to give you a quick timeline. You see across the top here, and I'm not going to belabor it, but it's a story of understanding where things are coming from and how these layers have occurred. And it's almost as though the ideas have been resurfaced and maybe a veneer has been placed and never really solving the true challenges of the site. But as you can see here, it was constructed in 1886 as part of a temporary exhibition zone, still nestled inside of a residential area, as you can see. And then in 1936, sort of jumping ahead, it was about a celebration of the Texas Centennial Expo. And that was, of course, Texas's freedom and independence. At the same time, they brought all these architects in to do Art Deco architecture, as well as these great paintings that still survive and still one of the highest concentrations of Art Deco architecture in the United States. And then big tech's debuts, and this is sort of a question for me. I came down to Texas about 12 years ago from Chicago, so I had sort of a zero understanding of Fair Park, and so it seems like a really fertile environment to sort of think about the identity of Texas. And of course, here's how they decided to establish who they were. It was with a big Anglo cowboy, I guess lording over all the people of the fair, but he is big Tex. You may be familiar with the Dallas Cowboys football team. They moved in and started playing football at the Cotton Bowl. So the story here is that this is a place of convergence. It's about bringing people together. But then this happens, okay? So it's all about, sort of scraping away and dividing people. This is really the point of crisis that I like to focus on. It's when they essentially took a neighborhood that was predominantly African American, scraped away all their homes to create a parking lot for the fair. So they leveraged this idea of necessity as a way of using cultural erasure. And so that division has never quite been healed, and that's what this project is trying to really support, hence the therapy piece. As you can see, when they took homes away, this is what was left, and it's still there today. And then 4 years later, the Cowboys moved out, so even now we're seeing a separation where the convergence was happening. Now things are dividing, and you're getting a very kind of a lonely, empty place, which should be really a jewel in Dallas. There's very few cities that can have 277 acres of park space devoted to just leisure and exposition. But here we've not quite turned the corner yet. There were some tests of trying to heal. I mean, they had Martin Luther King Boulevard dedicated just outside of Fair Park, which, as you'll see, is a site that we used for a competition. And this is really a gateway now that comes into Fair Park. Funny thing about Dallas is that they always say we like our cars. I think all these major metropolitan areas in the states like to drive. But here we take a Formula One race and push it through the park, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Of course, all the asphalt, it was 100 degrees outside. The asphalt started to melt. The drivers were having accidents. Everyone was upset, so that was canceled. But this is sort of the starts and stops. It seems like the bad choices always get implemented, and good ideas never quite take root. So we're trying to reverse that equation. Here you see that's the composite, great shot. You got big text, you got the car, and you got the football stadium. So everything that seems to be wrong with what would happen in a park, all celebrated here in one photograph. But it did get National Historic Landmark status, which was good. So a lot of the great buildings are preserved. They've been restored. They tell great stories. They are set pieces that are able to then be objects to build around. And then 93, they had the African American History Museum. So again, the components were coming back. We have a music hall there that has great Broadway productions. And so it's the livelihood and the real multifaceted nature is coming back to life. In 2003, there was a comprehensive development plan by George Hargraves, and they took a holistic view. The problem is nothing happened. That got stalled, and so since 2003, there was nothing. So here's where we get opportunistic, and here's where the unbuilt maybe has a chance to become built. At Perkins & Will, we have an annual internal competition where we allow every studio around the firm, individuals. You want staff, you don't want the offices themselves, you want anyone who's interested to submit to the competition. So we developed a brief in Dallas. I put together a Fair Park brief just outside, and you can see here we created a whole series of advertisements to recognize what was going on there, but also tell the story of what could happen about restructuring, reimagining, and recasting. The nice thing is we got 67 submissions from 24 different studios. So this is a whole catalog of ideas. And as you can see here, our Denmark studio took home the top prize. So they came in and we had a community meeting. So the Danes came and I talked about Dallas with them to the community about this project. As we know, showing these kinds of images as an installation to a community is really compelling. They can see what's out there. So the unbuilt here had potential to really give people hope. And again, that's 67 unbuilt projects right there. So I think I have maybe the most of all presentations this week. Try one more time. Maybe advance, yeah. And so here's our master plan. From this point of view, there's not a lot that's, I guess, compelling. It looks like what you would expect. But this is all about redefining the edges, putting the building blocks in place, allowing the infrastructure like stormwater, sanitary, wayfinding, parking, all of these things to be distributed properly and to create something that was inviting and welcoming. And if this were to take hold, it would be a genuine park with a whole range of diverse opportunities. And it's well on its way now. So it has bond approval. They're displacing the parking. They're creating a community park right here, which is where the community before was swept away. So now they're starting to try to heal that with this park space that starts to bring everyone together and reinstitute. But I would consider this more like maybe it's a circuit board or it's hardwired. It's not super ambitious. It stayed within the lines of the existing park, but everything can plug in at this point. So it has not stretched about outside the edges. But what we did learn through all this was what the community wanted. So we conducted dozens of meetings. We met with neighborhoods around the entire perimeter of the park. And so that gave us a chance to really understand what people wanted. And as designers, we all have a good sense of what's happening. But to prioritize all of the needs was really interesting to us. I mean, we had meetings in basements of churches. We went to libraries. We advertised these meetings on pizza delivery boxes. We knew that the best way to get to the community was through food. And so when someone ordered pizza from the local pizza parlor, they would have an advertisement about when these community meetings would happen. So we reached hundreds, if not thousands, of community members. But the thing about it was, what we were seeing here, and I'm kind of going backwards after our master plan was developed, but we recognized that you have 277 acres, but about 70 of those acres were actually pervious. There was very little area for the water to go. It could only hold a 5-year flood event, so it was always flooding. And so the real notion was just to bring the park back into the park. Sounds obvious, right? Not always so easy. You can even see how parking was really in surplus. So total supply was immense. And there were only a few moments of the year where the spikes actually required that kind of parking. So instead of developing a parking solution that would account for the spikes, the park designed for the worst case scenario for the entire year, which displaced a lot of other things. But then in 2012, big tech's caught on fire. So this was not Burning Man. This was post-Burning Man, but clearly a symbol of what maybe was going wrong with heat. The water story maybe is kind of just a clever companion to this, but it did sort of send a signal to what was going wrong at Fair Park. And we didn't necessarily want to recreate things the way they'd been done before, the way things were assembled. And you can see this, it's called a woofus on the left. It's a sculpture in the agricultural section, which is representative of, it's like a chimera that's reflective of all the animals that are exhibited, but sort of these interesting kind of anomalies at the park. And then we did a diagram. This is really quick, nothing you can take in, except to note that it's about a 365 understanding. It's environmental. It's about the flow of people. It's about the events that take place throughout the year and through time. So it was about history and about the environment that's occurring today to try to map a strategy that would start to resolve all these issues. In Dallas, you have to always look at some of these data points. We have one of the highest number of new millionaires minted every year in North Texas. At the same time, since 2000, the number of people in poverty, as it says here, has been increasing. So we have this real disparity that's growing. And so it's a socio-economic, environmental disparity, and we're searching for ways for, again, solutions to resolve this, and we're using water as this sort of hydrotherapy proposition. Another thing to note for us when we're looking at this, when we think about North Texas, the United States has a lot of geographic variance. We're actually more aligned climatically with places like Tunisia and Casablanca than we are with, say, Northeast U.S. or Northwest U.S. But we also get a lot of rain. If you know about Seattle, Washington, you may not know, but they're known for being wet and soggy. But we actually get a bit more rain annually than they do. And you can see here what happens is we're in drought mode, and almost overnight you can go into flood mode on the right. And if you take a picture from the right angle, it looks like we live on a beautiful lake or waterway, but in fact it's a flood zone. But we also celebrate some of the art that's at Fair Park by Aaron Douglas. You can see the lighting of Fair Park at night during the expo, and how the idea of light and the theme of light and water and reflection are always part of it. But this is usually the reality when we get floods. That's the actual real, that's a photograph, vintage photograph, but this is occurring more and more often in North Texas. You can see the red dots here. These are the highest areas of natural disaster in the U.S. And that could be quakes and tornadoes. We have a lot of different, overlaps because we're getting hurricane overlap. We're getting winds from the north. We're getting fracking and other earthquake issues. So we need to resolve this. And we're trying to use design to help solve these issues. If we want to focus on water, as it states here, 1 billion liters of water fall on Fair Park each year. And if we could actually supply 8,000 people a year, but right now it's just being channeled and pumped to the Trinity River, which goes out to the Gulf of Mexico, which then goes out to the ocean. So we're losing all this opportunity. And so we're, again, trying to stop all that, keep the water on site and use it productively. So I'll give you a couple of few slides that show just our intervention with something that tries to transform the idea of the master plan into something that is much more extensive. This is the actual natural path of the water. If we were to let the water go where it wants to go, this is the path it would take, and then it would finally drain its way out towards the Gulf of Mexico. But in the meantime, the proposal is to have no pipes, to bring all the water to the surface, no underground infrastructure, let the surface take care of it as it percolates through. And of course, the addition of infrastructure that would then stitch and create canals and walkways and help deliver the water. Fields, grow food, let this be self-sufficient because we know that we can generate enough food with that water to feed the community in that area. And then, of course, start to build an architecture that starts to work its way with a simple form into a rich layered expression. So instead of something now that's all flat, the idea, of course, is to make it multi-layered and thickened. So we're letting the water do its thing. We have ground plane, and now we're elevating the architecture in a very simplified way. And then there can be moments where you get taller architecture as well. But the layers of networks create a really clear form that, again, solves some of the issues that we're dealing with. Simple collage here, just getting the sense of space, proportion, showing everyone in the community and at the city the way you can actually build an architecture that creates density but also provides open space that, again, is regenerative and self-sufficient. What we really liked about leveraging what's already at Fair Park is these two great paintings by Olin Travis. The one that they're both called East Texas, before and after the discovery of oil. So you can see in the top, of course, there's the logging, and there's the painting of how that's working. And then, of course, the oil. Okay, so they discover oil. Now it's about the industrialization. You see all the refineries. And so our third version was just, let's continue to reverse the equations we said earlier. Let's make water the new oil. We know that. But it's now a site where you're actually feeding the area rather than extracting and taking away. So it's a pretty clear reversal. We like the triptych, and we think the idea of the way it's evolved is quite compelling and logical, and quite easily to achieve if certain things can be uncovered. I think we all have these probably in our studios. This is another unbuilt, so I've transplanted an unbuilt into an unbuilt. This is an 80-story all-timber tower that our Chicago studio has been working on. Obviously, it's not made it to the construction level yet because of codes and other reasons, but it's gone through some serious prototyping. But kind of like a laboratory where we pulled off the shelf, we pulled this one off the shelf and dropped it into our site and just speculated this as one of the building blocks for the architecture of the site. So now we had a bigger idea of how water and wood, so we're bringing the wood back now, but in a productive way. You can see here just a bit of how the architectural expression might be. Again, just a quick idea, the sense that you can go vertical, have great spaces, naturally oriented, and something that's much more biophilic. I think these are interesting points to make if we're talking about timber for a second, is that, again, an apartment for two requires about 30 square meters of timber, and 6 mature plantation trees can produce those 30 square meters. At the same time, Americans use about 6 trees per year for paper alone, so none of that really squares, right? All that sounds like it's kind of all going in the wrong direction in a way. So if we can take those same trees we're using for paper, use it for the production of timber in a way that creates housing, that might be a way forward. And we see the data about Canada and how much they can do with timber. But for us, I mean, Perkins Will has always been a fairly sustainable firm. I think we've led the charge for the last probably 25 years in terms of sheer volume and the way our green team has moved forward. But you can see here 30 studios across the world, predominantly North America, but Europe and Asia and South America as well. 2,600 staff. So the idea here is that we've got a lot of resources, a lot to draw from. And even in the competition I showed, this is the kind of pool we were really getting our ideas from. And it becomes a really nice incubator. We have some great partners who are part of our family. And so it's not only other architects like Schmidheimer Lawson, but we also have Nelson Nygaard, which is a mobility team, Portland in the UK, which is retail, and Pierre-Yves Rochon, which is hospitality. So the fact is we have the resources to help pull things together and assemble the team quickly. And that gives us a bit more latitude to try to explore. We've also, in the past couple of years, have defined something called living design to give a name and a sort of visual to how we think of holistic design. So these sort of 7 petals, I think it's all 7, you know, they change every now and then, but 7 petals of living design and how these are really accounted for. So when we actually go through our work, we rigorously check each other's through peer reviews and ensure that we're actually hitting the highlights of all of these petals. And some recent work just to show how that, you know, we've been doing this, but the real change and the unbuilt strategies that we just were looking at have informed the Dallas studio quite dramatically. Now this is a competition won by Chicago. It's the Jeff Bezos Museum in Washington, D.C. We've done master planning for San Francisco along the waterfront. We have a series of water buildings. So this is actually like a water institute in Baton Rouge, Illinois. Hospitals on the water, research buildings for L'Oreal on the water. One of my projects where it's kind of a ground scraper or a shadow caster, trying to create this really great space underneath in the Texas heat. So when it's 98 degrees outside, we did a measurement in the surface outside, it was 138 degrees. Underneath the shade structure is about 85 degrees. So much more reasonable and inhabitable. So stretching out that timeline and making the architecture part of the environment. And then lastly, it's just the idea that hydrotherapy is possibly a solution to help really bring not just environmental healing, but cultural and really environmental sort of correspondence. And we're calling it beyond sustainability. That's regenerative design, because we do think that the architecture working with the landscape and the awareness can truly be something that's productive and not reductive. So, thank you.